Okay, so this is my weekly recap video. I'm going over week's events from Sunday to Sunday. That's Sunday, September 17th to Sunday, September 24th, events that happened in Ukraine. What I do is I just talk about the headlines that I've paid attention to, and then sometimes I amplify them or spend a little extra time quoting them or what have you. Okay, so here we go. Sunday, September 17th. Kim returns home after a visit to Russia. I'm not sure yet what the Russians got out of this North Korea, Kim and Putin meeting. Um, Russia clearly wants artillery, but I think they want soldiers as well. But nothing actually was a firm commitment that we can detect. Okay, rifts over Ukraine will impact UN meeting, focus on the global south. So the UN meeting this past week was supposed to have much more emphasis, much more focus on global South, Africa, Latin America, and Ukraine kind of stole the focus. Now, Zelensky tried to return some of it, and it looks like pandering, but he was really talking about, hey, look, the global South needs to have more. More seats at the table, particularly in the Security Council. I think that might be a non starter, but that's what he tried to do. Okay, U.S. senators to meet with Zelensky on Thursday. So this was Sunday. This was writing about what was going to happen later in the week. Ukraine claims its forces retook Klitschkiva, which is south of Bakhmut, which was good progress. It's not great, but it's moving the right direction. Ukrainian drones strike Crimea and Russia. And this was happening with such frequency over the last 2 weeks that it was almost like, oh, another drone attack in Moscow or another drone attack in Crimea. And it just kept happening. Zelensky's 60 Minutes interview. So the interviewer, Peli, says, can you give up any part of Ukraine for peace? Zelensky, no. This is our territory. And then he went on and said, today, you said to me, you saw me awarding people medals. Well, today is a day like that. A week ago, I gave awards to parents of soldiers who have been killed. There were 24 families of the dead. There was a woman. She was there with 3 children. There were parents, very old. They could barely walk, and they had only one son. One of the women was pregnant. She arrived holding a baby in her arms, and she was pregnant. And that baby will never see. What should I tell them? That all of them died so that we could say, it's okay, Russia, you can take it all? It's a difficult job, you understand me, right? Giving awards to people whose faces show their whole world has collapsed. And all I can give them, all I can give them is victory. So Zelensky doesn't have the problem that is being said that he has, which is they say, well, how do we know what victory is? He says victory is restoring the entire territorial Ukrainian boundaries, right? No question about it. Can Russia have any of it? No. So he's very clear. As much as people say, "Oh, we don't know what victory looks like," he's not saying that we don't know what victory looks like. He's very clear about that. Okay. Monday, 18 September, Zelensky warns we mustn't give Putin a break. In that same 60 Minutes interview, that was the headline, that we mustn't give Putin any break. He wants to keep the pressure on him. Okay, U.S. Senator Mark Kelly visited Kyiv and discussed progress in the counteroffensive. Ukraine files claims with WTO. So there's essentially the equivalent of a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization against Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia from Ukraine. The reason was a year ago, Ukraine was allowed to sell its Ukrainian grain on the EU market, and then that became a problem for Polish farmers. Polish farmers then were upset about that because this grain was undercutting their grain. Makes sense. So the EU decided, okay, well, we're going to suspend this for a year. You're not going to be allowed to sell it. And then when the suspension came off, Poland said, no, we're still not going to let this grain in. And that's where Ukraine files this claim with the World Trade Organization against Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. This is a bad look. It's not going to, I mean, it looks ungrateful. It looks like, why are you doing this? Poland's been your best friend. Why are you doing that? And Yeah, it's going to become a problem later in the week. From the article, in accordance with the agreement on the rules and procedures governing the settlement of disputes of the agreement established the World Trade Organization, Ukraine submitted demands for consultations with Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary within the World Trade Organization. So it creates a mechanism where they have to come to terms of whatever their issue is. It's not like a lawsuit so much as a let's get together and talk this through suit, if that makes sense. It's fundamentally important for us to prove that individual member states cannot ban the import of Ukrainian goods. Therefore, we're filing these lawsuits against them in the World Trade Organization. At the same time, we hope that these states will lift their restrictions. That's what Ukraine said. So, but it's just a bad look. Okay, an article from RT seized Ukraine Zelensky home to become an anti-Nazi museum in Crimea. And Vladimir Konstantov said, he's speaking on TV, he says on channel Rossiya 24, the politician claimed that such a move would be a good way to, quote, vaccinate against Nazism for centuries to come, unquote, and serve as a warning as to what can happen to those, quote, schemers who pushed it too far, unquote. Konstantov explained that it was unlikely that the property would ever be purchased by a regular family since, quote, no normal person could live there, unquote, as it would be, quote, akin to purchasing Hitler's apartment, unquote. Well, that might be the Russian perspective, but I'm pretty sure that after Crimea is liberated, if that particular apartment that Zelensky owned will go for 10 times what it, or could go for 10 times what it actually is worth right now since Zelensky lived there. It's just a matter of perspective. Okay. Tuesday, 19 September, Moscow claims that it had invaded Ukraine in self-defense in a UN court. So that's the International Court of Justice at The Hague. Moscow is defending itself, says it invaded Ukraine out of self-defense. Let me quote a little bit. Quote, the Russian side can scarcely deny the claim about genocide, as this was heard in Russian President Vladimir Putin's address at 4 a.m. on 24 February 2022. He asserted that his country's invasion, which he euphemistically called a special military operation, was aimed at, quote, protecting people who have been subjected to bullying and genocide over the last 8 years. And for this, we will seek the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, unquote. Outside of Russian propaganda channels and fake video footage, there is no evidence at all to back such claims, which is undoubtedly one of the reasons why an unprecedented 33 countries subsequently filed declarations of intervention, effectively seeking to join Ukraine in this case. Okay, so yeah, they had to do it. They were pushed into doing that against their will, is what they're claiming. It was self-defense, and I don't think that anybody's going to buy that in The Hague. Ukraine claims that the claims of Ukrainian genocide as a pretext are false, so they were counterclaiming that. The Czech Republic, Denmark, Netherlands signed an agreement on the supply of weapons to Ukraine within the Ramstein framework. So that's some progress there. RT says Zelensky lied about a missile strike. Now this is interesting, and this will get some traction over the course of the week. There was a missile that hit a market in Donbass, and the Ukrainians were saying, well, it must have been the Russians. Well, we don't do that kind of thing. And they don't do that kind of thing. And I did an entire video about this, so you want to look that up if you have any questions. But I'll come back to this well, let's just go through it right now. Pravda said that Ukraine was exposed for striking the marketplace in Konstantinovka with a Buk missile. That's a anti-aircraft missile, or air defense missile. The Ukrainian market in Donbass was struck by an errant anti-air missile. The not the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times showed the trajectory and the direction and all that kind of thing, and said, yeah, this looks like it came from Ukraine. Well, it did come from Ukraine, and the Ukrainians didn't mean to do it. It looks like it was an errant missile, and they were firing that missile in self-defense. So as much as Russia was saying, well, see, Ukraine is firing this on civilians. No, errant anti-aircraft missile. It's tragic, but it wasn't intentional. And the conclusion of that video, and I urge you to go watch that video, was if they're shooting an anti-aircraft missile, it's an accident that it hit this marketplace, right? But more to the point, they squawked about, see, Ukraine's doing this one thing, where Russia does this all the time. Russia hits an apartment complex or a hospital or a school or whatever, and it happens again and again and again. Nobody even at this point bats an eye. Well, that's how Russians do this. But when Ukraine does one thing that is like that, and even though it was an accident, they're squawking about it, and it was really interesting contrast. Okay, Radio Free Europe talked about how there was evidence that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile. That's based on the New York Times reporting. Okay, at the same time, a Ukrainian warehouse full of aid supplies in Lviv is struck by Russian missiles, and Russia was striking targets left and right within Ukraine, and not complaining about any civilian casualties there. So, yeah. Okay, coal from Russia annexed Ukraine has been sold to Turkey. At least $14.3 million worth of coal produced in areas of Ukraine annexed by Russia has been exported to NATO member Turkey this year, according to Russian customs data reviewed by Reuters. So there are countries that are aggressing, that is, Russia is aggressing against Ukraine and backed by North Korea and Iran and Belarus. And then there are countries that are supporting Ukraine against their victimization. Most of the West, most of NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia. And then there are countries that are kind of in the middle that are profiting by this. India is absorbing a great quantity of oil. Turkey is absorbing this coal, even though Turkey is a NATO member. And Turkey looks like they're supporting Ukraine, but also meeting with Putin and trying to be in the middle and profiting on both sides. I think China is trying to quietly profit on both sides. They don't want to get themselves sanctioned, but they want to continue to get that cheap oil from Russia, and yeah, that's what's happening here. Okay, Ukraine urges the World Court to impose reparations on Russia. Zelensky is now in New York. He's discussing a grain hub with the Kenyan president. I talked about this just a few days ago, almost about a week ago, with my predictions of what was going to happen over the course of the week. Zelensky had to meet and be involved in retail politics with some of these other countries that he doesn't want to lose, like the Kenyan president, who will, be more on his side than on the other side. And he really needed to spend his time doing that. Zelensky had his UN speech. He accuses Russia of genocide. It's a great speech. I did an entire video about that, where just amplifying certain points along the way. The UN had Zelensky, Germany's Chancellor Scholz, Biden giving their speech today. Scholz warned of sham solutions to Ukraine. Don't fall for that, was his warning. Biden's speech: Russia seeks to brutalize Ukraine with no consequences. That was a good speech as well. Why are Cubans fighting for Russia in Ukraine was a headline this day. And I did a video last week about Cubans going to Ukraine thinking that they're going to be, some cleanup of rubble, doing that kind of work, and then they're sent to the front line. So there's like a human trafficking kind of thing going from Cuba, which is really bizarre. The UK could become EU light member. Not exactly about Ukraine, but this was really interesting and could have some ramifications within Europe. Quote, one suggestion is to offer different grades of membership, including an inner circle of countries with, quote, deep integration in areas like the Eurozone and Schengen area, unquote. The next concentric circle would consist of current EU, with a third circle of, quote, associate members, unquote, who participate in a single market, which could include the likes of Norway, which is in the European Economic Area with access to the trading bloc. The fourth circle could be a space for countries such as the UK and would involve political cooperation without having to be bound by EU law. And that's actually a really good and healthy thing for the UK, which didn't want to be regulated by the EU, but the more you can play nice together, the better off everybody else is. Even if they don't want the regulations, okay, we don't want the regulations and money, but let's still play nice. Okay, Wednesday, 20 September, Ukrainian military intelligence. Saboteurs blew up 2 planes and a helicopter near Moscow. With everything else going on, that I didn't even give that any play last week, but that's pretty significant. Pravda, Kremlin responds to Biden calling Putin a dictator. Well, he is a dictator. I mean, he's a dictator that has the veneer of democracy, but he's becoming more and more a dictator. RT, Sergei Shoigu visits Iran. Now, I watched clips of this on RT where they didn't really have a lot of commentary, but showed Shoigu and his not Ukrainian, Iranian counterpart, just marching around, being saluted, sitting down, having a talk. Um, it's absolutely amazing to me that what Russia wants to highlight is having a chat with Belarusian President Lukashenko, or meeting with Kim, or Sergei Shoigu talking to the Iranian counterpart of the military. I'm like, this is what you want to project to the world, that these are who your friends are? Okay, RT, Poland threatens to withdraw from support from Ukraine. That's where I first saw this. And then I saw actual reports of the same kind of thing. That Poland was not happy about Zelensky's speech. And yeah, we'll talk more about this in a little bit. There was another report that Russia's deliberately targeting hospitals, or has been deliberately targeting hospitals, particularly in, I think it was in Kherson. Zelensky at the United Nations, all world's regions should be represented in the UN Security Council. So I watched that speech, we talked about it, and I did a video on it. I don't think, so I think he was, pandering is not the right word, because pandering has this negative connotation, but he was reaching out to the global south in this. But I don't think, I think it's a non-starter. I don't think that the Security Council will broaden in that way. Many of those that are on the Security Council as permanent members are going to be, that they want to keep the status quo. China, particularly, I don't think the United States is that particularly interested in doing that. Russia might be, I don't know, but I just don't see that it's going to get traction. Okay, Zelensky laments the UN's weakness in the face of Russia's veto power at the UN Security Council, and that was a pretty strong plank in his speech. Zelensky also called for Russia to lose veto power. I don't see that getting any traction either. As much as it would be nice to have them lose their veto power right now, I can't see that that's going to change anytime soon either. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, why not? Well, because if that can happen to Russia, it can happen to others at different times, and they won't want to support that, I don't think. Albania transfers 22 armored personnel carriers to Ukraine, and that was overseen by all the UN news. Okay, Thursday, 21 September, Ukraine strike of Saki Air Base in Crimea, and that got overlooked as well, although there was a little bit about that command post that was the Sekamimus I talked about last week, but the Saki Air Base strike in general got very little coverage. Ukraine struck the Russian occupiers base in Melitopol. As a result of the missile attack, I'm quoting now, as a result of the missile attack, the commander of the Russian 58th Army, which is fighting in Zaporizhia direction, was wounded, as well as their chief of staff. The occupiers, that's the Russians, carried out 52 missile and 44 airstrikes over 24 hours. I predicted that last week in that video about predictions. What's going to happen? Well, while Zelensky's at the UN and in DC and making his rounds in North America, Russia was going to be throwing a tantrum, and they were going to have more strikes than they've had in the past, because they're trying to show that this is the news, not that. They've done this with every NATO conference or Ramstein conference or EU conference or whatever that Zelensky's gone to. The Polish MP, after Zelensky's speech, Zelensky talked about something indirectly that looked like it was pointing at Poland with the grain deal. After that, Polish MP bills Ukraine $23 billion for support. This is just a stunt. He doesn't have the authority to do that, but it was making a point. And then Poland announces that it's no longer arming Ukraine. And that was in Radio for Europe. In Pravda, it said Poland and Ukraine fight like two kids in a sandbox. Well, what was going on there? So it's about that grain deal, and Poland feels snubbed, and they were making their point known. Okay, so what happened was an unforced error. I did an entire video about this of, like, Poland. They never should have sued Poland. Like, leave that alone. And in the World Trade Organization, like I just described, just leave that alone. They're your friends. If you can't sell your grain in Poland, that's okay. Figure out another place to do it. Get it somewhere else. But don't make us think about that. That was the only part of the week that was bad. Everything else was breaking for Ukraine and Zelensky. Okay, Ukraine's awkward allies. Another interesting article about far-right Russians who are fighting against Russia. Well, I mean, enemy of my enemy, right? Russia air attacks hit cities from east to west. Reports of attacks on Ukraine's Kursk, Kiev, Kharkiv, Klemensky, Ravine, Vinnytsia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv regions. So they were hitting all over the place. Russia hits Ukraine energy facilities in the biggest attack in weeks, and this is the first time since last winter ended, or last spring, that they were hitting energy facilities, and it's a sign of things to come, I think. Ukraine hit in largest wave of attacks since August, and Zelensky faces difficult conversations in Washington. So he goes from the UN in New York down to Washington. Here he's meeting with congressmen and senators, and ultimately he'll meet with President Biden. Marjorie Taylor Greene flips and votes no on a Pentagon funding bill with Zelensky in town. Now, this is I'm quoting from The Hill. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the place down, McCarthy told reporters. Despite her yes vote on Tuesday, Greene has been a critic of Ukraine aid. Currently, the top line of spending number for the defense appropriations bill, as Greene is saying, is $826.45 billion, Greene said on X last week. Quote, the president asked for a top line number of $285 million, less than our top line. The House bill includes $300 million for Ukraine, which I will not vote for. To cut spending and please the members that don't want to vote for Ukraine, let's take out $300 million for Ukraine and pass this otherwise great bill, Greene continued. I just don't like Greene. She's very pro-Trump, very bombastic, and she doesn't seem to get the importance of Ukraine being able to beat back Russia. It's like she's oblivious. So it's just their fight, and it's not just their fight. Okay, Friday, 22 September. Czech Republic considering training Ukrainians on Gripen fighters. This was kind of overlooked with everything else going on as well. Zelensky is off to Canada to speak to the House of Commons. And so he met with Biden yesterday, and this is overlooked in my headlines from Thursday because you get that on Friday's headlines. So Zelensky's off to Canada to speak to the House of Commons. Biden told Zelensky that the U.S. will send ATACMS. Now, when will they get them? Well, we're supposed to have Abrams, and they're just getting to Ukraine now. I mean, so it's one thing after another that it takes time. There's a lag between the promise and the solution. So, but they will be getting ATACMS. Zelensky, and that was NBC News, so it's a reputable source. Zelensky tells reporters that he has to act fast and be careful with partners' money. This is in an interview with NPR, National Public Radio. Quote, we have to be very strict and very fast because we might lose the trust and the support of our partners, he told NPR. So he's thinking the right way, right? I understand that partners are helping us with this, and I need to move and make sure that things are accounted for. Apparently, he discussed this move with Speaker McCarthy, who emerged from their meeting and praised it. We have zero tolerance for corruption, he said, with him promising to be transparent on the inevitable occasions when it is found. And so there's going to be fraud somewhere. Someone's going to do something stupid, but they're rooting it out. I'm gonna do a video with about Rand Paul soon, and Rand Paul was talking about all this corruption and whatever, but they're rooting it out. They're working on trying to get this sorted out. Just wait for that video. You'll see what I'm talking about. The big news on Friday was that Ukraine missiles struck the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, and I have a half dozen or more articles just about that. And they really, I mean, this was a big victory. Prophet was saying, well, they hit a building. There's nothing to see here. The RT was saying the same kind of thing. But it was significant, and it looks like there were some casualties of some upper-ups in the Black Sea Fleet. We're not exactly sure who yet. Ukraine allows for Russian-related words to be written all in lowercase for unofficial documents. So Russia spelled with a little r. And that's kind of an insult. And it's probably the kind of thing that Russia's going to make hay about later on. I talked about that in the short video. But I get it. If I was Ukraine, I would feel exactly the same way. Saturday, 23 September, Lavrov dismisses Ukraine's peace plan and the UN effort to revive the grain deal. It's probably not going to go anywhere. The grain deal is not going to go anywhere. The peace plan, the peace is going to be decided on the battlefield, because when Russia resorted to arms, and their words not worth anything because they were supposed to respect the border, that's where it went. Okay, so The Hill. Zelensky visit shows that McCarthy walks a fine line. The Hill is a journal, a magazine art that's going to focus very much on U.S. politics and what's going on Capitol Hill. Hence the name The Hill. So McCarthy walks a fine line. Quote, he wants to be supportive of Ukraine, but he also has to address this faction that is kind of disrupting U.S. policy, said Monahan. Quote, I think he's trying to keep his eye on what really matters, which is Ukraine supplemental. He's trying to hold together the bipartisan support for that, unquote. But Monahan argued that if McCarthy continues to push the Ukraine issue aside, it could lend more power to skeptical House Republicans. Quote, this remains a very vocal minority. Notice that it's a very vocal minority. It's not a huge faction, but it's enough to cause disruption. Very vocal minority, but it may be getting larger, he said. McCarthy is going to have to step up and help make the case for this aid and its wider implications for national security. So McCarthy's a Republican, the House majority leader. He's a Republican. He supports Ukraine. Many Republicans do support Ukraine, but there's a very vocal faction that reads RT talking points regularly, and that's a problem. Okay, Ukraine, MP is working, actually there's multiple MPs, members of parliament, working on anti-oligarch laws that will take effect after the war. So the law is, and I'm quoting now, the law essentially gives tycoons a choice of refraining from politics or selling their media assets, and lists people who meet certain criteria, such as having a significant effect on economic or political weight, to be registered as oligarchs. So this is very much like Russia. It sounds very weird to our Western ears, but that's kind of a way of keeping them out of that influence process. I'm not sure how happy I am with the law, but from where they are, it might be a good step forward, although I can't quite tell. I haven't read the bill itself. However, the law, part of a broader de-oligarchization campaign by President Volodymyr Zelensky, has been criticized at home and abroad as a populist measure that could be abused to target political opponents and their backers. And that is a possibility, but from what I understand of it, it's moving them the right direction, but I still would want to improve on that bill if I had my druthers. Okay, Zelensky and Trudeau discuss a Ukrainian investment after the war with business leaders. So Zelensky's doing all the right things. Other than that little kerfuffle with Poland, which should never have happened, he's there begging for resources from Washington and from Canada, and presenting his case both in Washington and Canada and the UN. And he's also here in Canada meeting with business leaders about what's going to happen after the war. So he's doing all the right things, from where he sits in his job, and I give him high marks. Okay, Sunday, just a couple of things. RT said that Tucker Carlson said that the U.S. government stopped him from interviewing Putin. Quote, I tried to interview Vladimir Putin, and the U.S. government stopped me, Carlson claimed in an interview with Swiss publication. What? I'm not sure how the U.S. government stopped him or what was going on there, but we're going to take Tucker's word for that. Okay. War crimes dossier to accuse Russia of deliberate starvation in Ukraine. There were lawyers working on this right now, trying to prove that Russia is trying to starve out Ukraine or weaponize food and energy as a weapon of war. And that's all from Sunday. It's early Monday morning, wee hours of the morning as I'm putting this together. So there might be a few more pieces, but that's enough for right now. Okay. That was a good half hour of catching you up on the week, and I hope that helps you understand more context of what happened last week. It was another good week for Ukraine. Last week was a good week for Ukraine, and the week before was a good week where they punched some holes into that sub and the in Crimea. That was a good week as well. So it's been pretty rough for Russia. The only thing that they've really had to show for last week was just terrorizing civilian populations by shooting lots of missiles. The week before, all they had to show for was meeting with Kim. But what they get out of the meeting with Kim, I just don't know. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes. If you are not subscribed, please subscribe. If you are subscribed, ring that bell. Thank you for the coffees. I really appreciate it, especially in the early morning hours where I'm spending the time doing this. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow. Hope you will be too.